Encore is, we think of it as integrating Go code with infrastructure and really what that enables. So it's not just about infrastructure, it's also about building a really productive workflow around that. So with this picture where we have our code, we have our local environment, we have our testing environment, and we have our production environment in the cloud. The problem we have with existing tools like Terraform and Docker Compose is that all of these look different. They're implemented different ways, and actually achieving that is incredibly complicated. And that's the problem that Encore is trying to solve. So the way it works is Encore provides a Go SDK that you use when you're writing code. Then you use Encore Run to run it on your machine. And then whenever you want to deploy to the cloud or to a testing environment or a preview environment, Encore's platform completely automates that. So it's really focusing on DevOps automation. Let's break it down. There are three main parts to Encore. There's the local development aspect that is really optimized for speed and simplicity. I'm not going to go through all of these features, but the main thing is that you can directly in your source code express infrastructure and directly in Go access all this infrastructure in a type-safe way. There's a lot of built-in whistles that we'll get into. Next, we have testing. And this is something that is really underappreciated if you think about traditional DevOps workflows. And Encore supports testing in two ways, both in terms of writing automated tests, whether that's unit tests with mocking or integration tests, as well as things like creating test environments and preview environments. All of that is completely automated. And last, but certainly not least, there is the DevOps automation piece. And because Encore is all about declarative infrastructure, it means that when you're writing code using Encore's Go SDK, you are declaring what infrastructure you need, which means that Encore can take that description and just completely automate infrastructure provisioning. It means that you never have to write any Terraform, you never have to write any Kubernetes YAML files, and it's secure by default because Encore can automatically optimize all of the permissions and set things up in a way that's secure by default. So you never have to worry about, is this database locked down or not? Let's take a look at what that looks like. Encore provides a Go SDK where you can declare infrastructure semantics in your application code. For example, if you want to define an API in Encore, that's just a normal function. You never have to define a router and wire all of that up. It's just a function. And what that means is if you want to make an API call, you just call this function like you would any other function. And Encore will translate that into an actual API call. If you want to define a database, same thing. You import Encore's SQL database package, and then you can, in your Go code, just declare, I want a database. And Encore will read this code and provision that database for you. It doesn't run the code, it just parses it. And that's really important, as we'll get into later. If you want to define a pub subtopic, same thing. You import the pubsub package, and then you call pubsub.newTopic. And if you're familiar with Go, you actually specify the message type as a generic parameter. You can see here that the user object is the message that's being sent. And that means that you actually get type safety between services when you're building a distributed system. And Encore will propagate this object between systems, which is really, really powerful from a reducing boilerplate perspective. Same thing with caching, same thing with defining cron jobs, same thing for defining secrets. All of these things, they're all about defining the semantics of infrastructure. What you are not defining is I want a Kubernetes cluster, or I want a database with 5 gigs of memory and 4 CPU cores. You're only defining the things that matter from the semantics of your application. What that means is that Encore can change how you provision infrastructure for different environments. Let's take a look at what that workflow looks like. What you see here on the screen is an example of a billing system where you might have an API for creating an order. And here, in just normal Go code, you can define the request and the response of this API endpoint. And Encore will parse all of the source code, and then it will automatically render beautiful API documentation, completely automated, based on the source code itself. This means the documentation is never out of date, and you can just hand it to a front-end developer or another team that want to build using your API. Next, let's say that we want to call another service. So how we might do that is we import the other service and we call the function. Here you see how you might call the get product endpoint to fetch information about a product. And it just looks like normal Go code, right? You're importing a package and you're calling a function. But what Encore reads into it is that, oh, this function that you're calling, it's actually an API. What you're doing is you're making an API call. And Encore, when it compiles this service, translate this into an actual API call over the network. And what you see at the bottom is Encore's architecture diagram. And this automatically represents that now there's a dependency from the billing service to the product service. Similarly, if we look at PubSub, you might define an order created topic, and then you can publish from this API endpoint whenever an order is created. And Encore will automatically, when it provisions and starts up this service, it will automatically provision the appropriate infrastructure for different environments. So locally, you get SQ. In GCP or AWS, you get the native infrastructure that those cloud providers provide. And then you see at the bottom is the architecture diagram is automatically updated to reflect that now we're actually publishing messages on this topic, and any subscription will receive that message. What's so powerful about this is it never goes out of date, because the source code is the thing that actually defines the behavior of the application. And finally, Encore, because it understands all of these API endpoints, provides an API explorer where you can easily call any endpoint as you're developing. And whenever you call an endpoint, Encore will automatically trace it, which means that you can dig into exactly what happened. If you've ever worked on distributed systems, you probably know the feeling that you're working on some new feature and you make an API call and it fails. And you have no idea where, because you have like 5 different services that are all being called, and you get back an error message, but you have no idea where it actually broke. With Encore's built-in tracing, you can dig into exactly what went wrong and much easier find and fix the issue. Finally, if we look at the Encore cloud platform, you can easily integrate Encore with your own cloud, and then you can create any production or staging or test environment directly into your own cloud account. Encore will handle all of the DevOps automation straight to your own cloud. And because the source code captures all of the infrastructure that you need, it's fully automated. And because Encore is then optimizing it for the specifics of that environment, in a testing environment, you might want Cloud Run, whereas in a production environment, you might want Kubernetes. You can easily change that on a per environment basis. And Encore will automatically change the underlying infrastructure to be optimized for what you need for that environment. And if you want things like approvals for your production environment to make sure that you're not doing something you didn't intend to, you can obviously do that. And then to make any changes, it's just a matter of tweaking the scalability parameters. You can do that straight from Encore itself. So with that, if you want to try it yourself, you can just sign up on encore.dev, try out any of these features. It's free for hobby use, and you can build pretty much anything without leaving your editor. That's how powerful it is.